My boyfriend, 29 male, and I, 24 female, have been dating for 6 months, and last week we decided to take a vacation to celebrate 6 months of being together. We'd been planning for it for days, so naturally I was very excited about it since this was the first time I'd be going on vacation with a boyfriend. It was a huge deal for me, so my boyfriend offered to pay for it all as well. I was a little skeptical since I earned for myself and could very well afford to split the bill, but he insisted that this should be his treat, and eventually I caved because he was being really sweet about it. My boyfriend also insisted that I let him take over the planning, and once we decided where we wanted to go, I left it all up to him. He's the one who booked the hotel and decided the dates as well, and I was only responsible for packing our stuff, which was fine by me. Anyway, after almost 2 weeks of planning, we finally headed out last week. We were visiting Malibu, and after a short plane ride, we finally reached a lovely resort that my husband had booked for us. I was pleasantly surprised that my boyfriend knew exactly the kind of place that I'd wanted since it was really nature inspired and had even booked a sea facing room for us. It was all just perfect, and I told him so as well. We were supposed to be on vacation for a week, but on the second day, I ran into my high school ex boyfriend at breakfast. My ex and I had broken up almost 6 years ago, but we'd remained friends since we'd parted on good terms. He was there with his wife and his twin toddlers, and it was quite a pleasant meeting. I greeted him and his wife with hugs, and after a bit of small talk, I learnt that this was the last day of their stay, and after giving me some pointers on what was worth seeing, we went our separate ways. I had breakfast by myself that day since my boyfriend is a late riser and likes to sleep in. But I wanted to make the most of my time there, so I woke up early. Anyway, after I'd had breakfast, I went back up to my room, and to my surprise, I noticed that all my boyfriend's stuff was gone. I couldn't find my boyfriend in the room either, so I decided to call him up, but received no response. So I called him a few more times, but still didn't receive an answer. And that's when I started panicking. I tried to text him as well, but he just wasn't responding to anything. After around 15 minutes of trying to get through to him, I called reception to ask about him and was told that he'd left with his stuff and had left a note for me. I was obviously shocked that he'd left, but told them to send the note up nevertheless, since I was still holding out hope that this was all just some stupid prank that he was pulling on me. I was given the note, and it really confused me at first because it said that he'd seen me with my ex and wished me luck. He also mentioned that everything had been paid for, so I didn't need to worry about anything, and had ended with message received. It was an incredibly confusing message, and I had no idea what he was talking about, so I decided to call him a few more times. But like before, there was just no response. And eventually I realized that he'd blocked my number. Not just that, when I tried to message him on Instagram, I realized that he'd blocked me there as well. I had no idea why he'd done something so extreme, with little to no explanation, and was panicking in the room while rereading the note to make sense of it. After a while, I came to the conclusion that he'd probably come down to the restaurant to surprise me for breakfast, but had probably seen me hugging my ex and come to the worst possible conclusion. He'd seen my ex in a few old high school pictures I still have up on Facebook, so that's how he recognized him. I felt devastated that he'd just abandoned me without even bothering to give me a chance to explain, so that I could have at least told him that it was just an innocent hug right in front of his wife, which meant absolutely nothing. He just left without even speaking to me first, which just hurt. I cried myself to sleep and didn't wake up until it was time for dinner. I didn't know what to do or where to go and felt totally lost. I texted a few of our common friends and tried to convince them to get him to speak to me, and they were pretty shocked about what had happened as well, and promised me that they'd try their very best. But even then, I didn't hear from him for hours. So on the morning of the second day, I was still feeling pretty miserable, but I'd also started feeling angry about what he'd done. He hadn't even bothered to find out what the truth was, which meant that he had basically zero trust in me. I decided to stay there for the next few days, more out of spite for my boyfriend than anything else, and did everything on my own. By the fourth day, I was feeling a lot better anyway and ended up staying the full week. I'd already made up my mind to pay my boyfriend back as soon as I got home. Yesterday, I finally returned and I was feeling rejuvenated since I've always had the travel bug and this was just what I needed. A few days after I returned, I paid my boyfriend the money back online since he had probably forgotten to block me there. Within minutes, I received a call from him and he sounded really pissed off. He told me that I wasn't doing him any favors by returning the money to him and that I should be ashamed of myself. I'd gotten over the hurt and was pretty angry myself as well, so I told him that it wasn't my fault he was so insecure. He then went on to accuse me of planning this whole vacation around my ex because I wanted to cheat on him and that he knew I'd spent the rest of my days in the resort with my ex. So I could keep the money to myself since he didn't even want to associate with a disgusting cheater like myself. I couldn't believe that he was accusing me of planning to run into my ex when he was the one in charge of selecting what resort we went to and on what dates. It didn't make any sense. And moreover, he had the audacity to suggest that I was cheating without any proof. I didn't want to argue with him anymore, so I decided to hang up and blocked him right back. However, my anger has cooled off since, and I'm wondering if I did the right thing. I've been thinking about what I would have thought had I seen him hugging his ex while we were on vacation, and I guess him feeling insecure was valid. I do think he should have tried to talk to me about it at the very least instead of just abandoning me. That was a really horrible thing to do to me. And it was just an extreme reaction. But then I made things worse by deciding to stay at the resort for the rest of the week as well. Obviously, he would think that I was spending it with my ex, and it would just confirm his worst suspicions. I just think I messed up by not even trying to clarify this huge misunderstanding. What he did was weird and extreme, but I don't think I'm any better for what I did. I do miss him, and I guess being on vacation has been a good distraction from the pain of it all this past week, but now I have nothing else to think about, and it's all just so messed up in my head right now. I want to apologize and get back to him, but I'm still hurt by what he did. I'm just confused about what I should do right now, and I desperately need some advice to save my relationship because, in spite of everything that went wrong this week, I still love him and want him back. I also want to make sure I'm not in the wrong here, though. So, AITA for not explaining the circumstances of my hug with my ex to my boyfriend when he seemed insecure about it. Update 1. I missed him way too much, and with nothing else to distract me, I decided to call him. It's been 3 days since the last update, and I finally caved, unblocked him a few hours ago, and decided to call him. To my surprise, it actually went through, and I even realized that he'd kept me unblocked everywhere, so maybe he was actually expecting me to reach out to him eventually. He answered the call, and even though he was curt, he still responded. I asked him if he could come over so that we could discuss what had happened and talk things through because I didn't want to lose him, and he agreed. I bought some chocolates and flowers to apologize because I do think I must have gone wrong somewhere and was too quick to react just like he had. So he came over around 2 hours ago, and I started off by apologizing to him for not bothering to explain what had actually happened when he called. I told him everything about how my ex and I had only run into each other for a few seconds, and I'd even hugged his wife before him, so it was all completely innocent and harmless. I also told him that it was really hurtful the way he just left me without any explanation or even discussing things with me first, and he seemed really embarrassed as well and admitted that he'd overreacted. He said that he was really sorry about all the things that he said and that I had every right to be pissed at him for what he did. He also explained that seeing me hug another guy while he was paying for everything really got to him, and he didn't think anything through before leaving in a rush. He spent the next few days being completely miserable and even wanted to reach out to me, but when he got to know from my friends that I was still at the resort, he changed his mind and started believing his own messed up theory that I'd been cheating on him with my ex. After everything was out in the open, I asked him if we should just be done and dusted with this episode and start afresh because I really did miss him. But to my surprise, he said that he needed some time to cope with whatever had happened and believed that a break would be better for both of us given what had just happened. I was really confused since I thought that since now both of us had apologized to each other for the way we'd behaved, we could put this whole thing behind us, but I guess not. He left around half an hour ago, and I'm feeling a lot more lost and confused at this point than I was earlier. I don't know if we're going to get back together or not, but right now, all I can do is wait for him to come around. Update 2. Hey, few days have passed since the last update, and while my boyfriend and I had been texting and checking up on each other regularly, it just didn't feel the same anymore. At least for me, I couldn't just pretend I didn't love him and text him as though we were just friends. I know it sounds weird and selfish, but that's what it is, so I didn't respond to any of his texts today. I feel terrible doing this to him, but at the same time, I know for a fact being just friends with someone I love so much is just not going to work for me. It never has, and I don't think it will. If we're meant to be broken up, then I'd rather take some time and heal instead of continuing to speak to him every day. Because I know that if he decides that we shouldn't get back together and we remain broken up, then it'll be tough for me to move on afterwards, and I don't want to risk it. I've been giving him the cold shoulder, but he hasn't addressed it yet and thinks I'm just busy. If he asks about it, I might explain my feelings to him, but I'm hoping it doesn't because that might look like I'm pressuring him or trying to manipulate him into getting back with me. I don't know. All of this has just made me an emotional mess. He noticed that I wasn't responding, and after a day or two, he decided to stop texting me as well. I can't say I didn't see this coming, but boy, am I shattered that he decided to not speak to me anymore. I don't know why it hurts so much since I was the one who initiated this. I guess I just expected him to at least try and get to the bottom of why I wasn't speaking to him so that we could sort things out. But he didn't even bother. He was ready to give up on the relationship very easily, and I guess it makes sense since that's what he did the first time around as well. I'm heartbroken that this is happening to me, but there's not much that I can do at this point. He's the one who wanted a break, and now it seems as if we're not going to get back together anytime soon. So I was right. I guess he did intend to dump me with me, but suggested a break first instead so that it'd seem more mutual and would soften the blow a little. I know my boyfriend or ex, I guess, isn't really one for confrontation or whatever, and this seems like something he would do because I know his thought process quite well. I'm contemplating whether or not I should block him everywhere again so that it's easier to move on because things seem pretty final now. Update 4. So I received a text from my boyfriend asking if I could meet him. Now, under ordinary circumstances, I would have agreed instantly, but something happened that sort of put me in a tough spot. As I said earlier, I was thinking about blocking him everywhere, and that was making me really sad. So I decided to stalk him one last time and go through all his posts with me in them, just to gauge whether I still had the same intense feelings for him or not, and make sure I wasn't making a mistake. I know it was a weird way to get closure, but that's the only thing that I could think of. However, when I opened his account to go through his posts, I noticed that all the posts that I was a part of were nowhere to be seen. I refreshed his page 4 or 5 times to check if it was a glitch, but it showed up the same every single time. I was really shocked that he'd bothered to remove every single picture of us from his profile, since he wasn't really big on social media and didn't bother with it usually. He even had really old photos with his ex in them because he couldn't be bothered to delete them or archive them. So that was really just weird and kind of hurtful. I'd been crying at the smallest things nowadays anyway, and seeing this triggered me yet again. I was in the middle of having a good sob fest before I blocked him again, since this was now crystal clear to me that he didn't want me in his life anymore. But that's when he texted me asking if we could meet. Obviously, I do want to meet him because whatever is happening is really messing with my head and I don't like it one bit. I'm used to having clarity in my relationships, and this is as confusing as it gets. I've been an emotional mess ever since I came back from the vacation, and every single time I interact with my boyfriend, the situation just seems to get worse and worse, and I just don't think I can take this anymore. This is getting ridiculous, and I need it to stop because it's beginning to affect my mental health really badly. I think I'm going to see him regardless of how I feel right now. I don't even care about what happens or whether he wants to meet me to patch up or dump me. I just want to get this whole weird and messy situation to be over with once and for all and get some closure. So, yeah, I guess I'm going to go meet him after all, and hopefully I'll have some answers to this whole thing this time now. Update 5. Well, I just came back after meeting with my boyfriend, ex-boyfriend to be more precise, since we've decided that it's best for the both of us to part ways, at least for now. And after hearing him out, this decision was mutual, unlike the first time. We met for coffee at a place near my house, and after some awkward small talk, we finally got to discussing the real issue. I asked him why exactly was he being so weird about everything, and he sort of had a breakdown. I wasn't anticipating that at all and was pretty taken aback. It took him a while to compose himself, and in the meantime, that earned me a lot of curious looks from the people around us. Anyway, once he did manage to get back to normalcy, he started with his side of the story. He told me that the girls he dated right before me had cheated on him, and the way she'd done so was so twisted that he just couldn't forget about it no matter how hard he tried to. They'd broken up a year before we got together and had been together for almost 1 year. He'd always refused to speak about his ex, and after initially trying to get him to talk, I gave up since he clearly didn't seem comfortable with discussing his past relationships. But I couldn't have imagined something like this, and it came as a real shocker to me. Apparently, he'd taken his ex on vacation for their 1 year anniversary as well, but unlike us, she'd been the one to plan it all. She told him that she'd take care of everything else, he just had to pay for all of it. This seemed fair to him at the time because he really loved her, and moreover, he earned a lot more than her as well, so it's the only thing that made sense. However, once they got to Hawaii, the place she'd picked, she started acting all weird and distant. She'd even booked 2 separate rooms for them, which was really confusing for him, but he didn't question it as he wanted to respect her decision. They hadn't moved in together or anything either, so having 2 separate rooms made sense to him as well. Anyway, she spent the first 2 days of the vacation in her room, saying that she felt sick and that the beach air was probably responsible for it. This seemed strange to him, but again, he didn't question it simply out of respect. He didn't want to make it seem like he was suspicious of her or wanted to paint her as a liar, just in case she was being truthful. He did all the touristy things by himself and tried his best to give his ex her space, as that's what she'd asked for. On the morning of the third day, he needed some sunscreen because he'd run out of his own, so he went to his ex's room to ask for some. She hadn't locked the door and he'd forgotten to knock beforehand, so he walked in on his ex, fast asleep in the arms of some man he'd only seen in pictures. He realized that it was his ex's high school crush, whom she talked about pretty often. She'd once told him that she regretted not making a move on him when they were in the same city, and even mentioned that she would have done so then, but he'd moved to Hawaii for work. Her phone was unlocked in her hands, and after overcoming the initial shock of the situation, he decided to go through her phone to find out what exactly had happened. He found out that a few weeks ago, this guy had reached out to his ex, and that's when they'd begun flirting. Eventually, it turned into something more, and they decided that they wanted to meet each other and be together. But his ex didn't earn enough to visit him at that point, and the guy couldn't just uproot his whole life to move and be with her. So they came up with this plan to make a fool out of my boyfriend, and that's how he ended up getting cheated on. He left, got on the very next plane back home, and blocked his ex everywhere, and he still doesn't know what happened to her afterward. Naturally, when he saw me hugging my ex while we were on vacation, it brought up some really painful memories of his past. He overreacted and made a rash decision to leave, but the guilt and pain of it all kept eating away at him for the next few days. This is why he'd been acting so strangely for the past few days, because while he knew that he was doing something wrong to me, he also couldn't help it because he himself was so confused about his own pain and emotions. After he finished his story, I hardly had any words to console him and felt terrible about what he'd had to go through. I could also finally make sense of his irrational behavior to a certain extent, since he was clearly still grappling with the trauma of his last relationship. I can't even imagine what going through something like that would do to a person. So I told him that I forgave him for what he did in spite of how messed up it was, since what had happened to him sort of explained his behavior. I suggested that he go to therapy to work out his feelings regarding all of this, as he never really got the closure he needed from his ex. He thanked me for being so understanding and hoped that we could still remain friends because he really did value me as a person. He promised me that he'd go to therapy, and when he felt he was ready to be in a relationship again, he'd be a better boyfriend to me. So, yes, we've broken up for now, and while I don't know if we have a future together or not, I do hope that he gets better. We've decided to stay friends, and I'm hoping that one day we can be together again because, like I said, I really do love him and want the best for him. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.